Thomas and Friends' Wonders of Sodor came out back in March, and since then, between dabbling in the photo mode and the frankly insane crash physics, there's only really been one question on everyone's mind. When will we see more from the game? Well, now we know. If you've not heard, on August 25th, Dovetail Games are hosting a direct where it's been confirmed Wonders of Sodor will be mentioned, and everyone has ideas on what will be added or announced. However, I think I might be in a somewhat rarer position as both a Thomas fan, but also someone who's been within the Train Sim World community for the past 6 years, and as someone who's spent way too much money on DLCs for the game. I think I might be able to offer a unique perspective on how Dovetail operates. What this video is really about is a discussion on what I think realistically will be announced, and then what, a bit more unrealistically, I'd like to see for the game's future. First off though, what is a Dovetail Direct? Well, mostly they're an event for Dovetail Games to showcase news within the Train Sim World community, and if recent leaks, and to be honest recent trends from past directs are anything to go by, I suspect we will be seeing Train Sim World 7 being announced alongside more DLC for the future of Train Sim World. This will likely take up a big chunk of the direct. However, Train Sim World isn't the only game that has been featured before. In 2024 we saw more games such as Metro Rivals, Dead, Train Sim World VR, Dead, and a really odd Roblox tycoon game with quote-unquote realistic engines,
all inspired by real-world classics.
That's also dead. So with these projects out of the way, there is a big slot left open, with only really Wonders of Sodor being able to fill it. To get people's expectations set in stone however, past directs on the Dovetail channel are roughly 3 hours long, but 2 hours of that is normally the countdown. So the direct will roughly be about an hour long of stuff we actually care about, and if you're only there for Wonders of Sodor, I suspect we're only really going to mention for about 20 minutes at most. But I do hope I'm wrong. Now on to what I think we will be getting. It's important to note that the devs themselves are Thomas fans, and even though whatever is being announced will probably have been in the works long before the game even released, I do feel like they're going to have an idea of what the average fan of the series is looking for. I think the first thing we will hear about is another patch being brought to the game. The first bug fix we got earlier this year was a massive patch, one of the biggest Dovetail have put out for any game in recent memory, only being beaten out recently by a recent Train Sim World patch for the UK content which came out about a month ago. That said, the game is in a much better place from when it was at launch, but it's still not perfect. The track monitor setting still does nothing, which is one of my major gripes with the game, which I really hope gets fixed. For those unaware, the track monitor is in the top right of the screen in Train Sim World, and shows you upcoming signal or speed changes without that horrible floating icons that we currently have on Wonders of Sodor. We also know a few things are coming to the game in free updates in future, such as an updated face menu that shall now work on console, and an update to the free roam mode to allow us to place down individual engines and trucks. Both of these will be lovely quality of life changes, and on top of the many bug fixes that have been marked as a work in progress on the official Dovetail server, I think another patch could really put the game in a much better position. Now, next I suspect we'll be told about DLC. Now I know what people will say, DLC already? But sadly given Dovetail's track record, I think it is likely. Now it's not to say that DLC is a bad thing, but Dovetail are known for lots of DLC being put out for their games, and I doubt Wonders of Sodor will break that trend. That said, I do think Wonders of Sodor's DLC will be a bit cheaper than most of the Train Sim World ones, or at the very least we won't be paying a premium for it. Recent releases such as the Class 90 for Train Sim World were priced at £12.99, same as the James DLC. It brought in a new engine in some new liveries, with new scenarios, which are the Train Sim World equivalent to stories, but it only brought about 15 Class 90 timetable services. In comparison, while James is a much less detailed model given the art direction of Wonders of Sodor, and unlike the Class 90 he actually worked at launch, he brought with him a full timetable with 71 new services, a new engine, 4 new stories, and the tankers. So all things considered, I'd say the James DLC was more worth it. The Class 90, to be fair, is a bit of an outlier. It was a third-party release, and one that is almost universally hated for how buggy and lackluster it is. But it does feel like a fair comparison, given it is the newest standalone local DLC for the UK content in Train Sim World, and it's also an example that even though Dovetail have some really good DLCs, they also have some real misses. So I'd recommend looking for reviews of any new DLC for Wonders of Sodor before you buy it. Now for what DLC I think will be getting announced at the Direct. I think it's very likely we'll see Edward in this branch line. Edward was the first character introduced in the series, and I think it would be a massive shame not to include him and the Brendan branch line as the first DLC. On top of this, inside the game's files, we have a fully functioning shunting challenge at Wellsworth, which some fans have been able to mod back into the game, showing that it's basically done. Currently, it uses Thomas, but I could see this featuring Edward or another shunter. Realistically, I think we will likely see him perhaps Salty for shunting at the docks, or Nia. Nia is a character who doesn't get much love in the fandom, but she does work on the branch line in CGI, so I think bundling her with Edward, who is guaranteed to sell, would be a great way to include her without the fear of people not wishing to pick her up. I'd hope that similar to the base game, each of these route DLCs would come with story packs for the new characters, with at least 4 to 6 new stories, similar to how in Train Sim World, new routes come with a handful of scenarios. Now, for what the prices will be, I think it could be very easy to point to Train Sim World where new routes are sold for £29.99 and say that that will be the price of the route. But I don't think it will be. This will be a short route. The entire main line in Wonders of Sodor is so much shorter than the majority of Train Sim World routes, running to about 60 miles, where your average UK Train Sim World route runs from about 80 to 100. So Edward's branch line can't really be any more than about 15 to 20 miles long. Wonders of Sodor is already £10 cheaper than Train Sim World 6, and with the recent release of the Thames Valley Branches route in Train Sim World, which includes 3 small branch lines totaling a total of 17 miles between them, being reduced to only £14.99, I think we could see a price between the two at roughly £20, somewhere in that ballpark. Now, I know what people will say, I can hear the comments now. What about Bill and Ben? Or Boko! But we have to remember 2 things. First of all, Dovetail love to include DLC on top of DLC. A good example of this is the Thomas add-on for Train Sim World 5. To play that DLC, you must own Train Sim World 5. And then you must also own the West Somerset Railway. Then, to play the DLC, you need the Thomas DLC, and if you want the green Thomas, you need to buy a separate pack again. I can see the clay pits and the twins for it being a separate add-on. Secondly, the way Wonders of Sodor is being made is that they're taking the CGI models and adding to them. This I think looks great in the game, I have no issues with it. But they do need the CGI characters for a base, so characters like Duke or Boko might come to the game, but I doubt it will be straight away. I can also see the announcement of a character pack being included at the Direct, and honestly the most realistic pack I could see coming to the game next is a Henry pack. I'd imagine it'd be something which requires you to own the Brendan branch, but would include Henry, some vans for the Flying Kipper, and some story scenarios running from Brendan all the way to Vickerstown or to Knapford. Throw in a timetable with Henry going along the main line, and I think that could be a really solid bundle. Perhaps the Kipper crash could be included as well as one of the stories. Now, there is one thing I do want to mention, and it is one of the big fears I do have with Wonders of Sodor. The timetable. What do I mean by that? Well, in Wonders of Sodor, in the base game, Percy fetches the coaches for the big engines. But if you own the James DLC, James has to fetch his own. This is because Percy's timetable is already full, so we can't interact with James or any of the non-base game DLC characters we might see in future. And by default, any character from the base game cannot pull the tankers, unless you place them down in free roam. None of the scenarios give them tankers as part of their goods trains. Train Sim World has a few ways to get around this, but the first one is called layering. New engines layer onto existing timetables to fill in the gaps. And to an extent this is what James does. If you add James, he slots into the timetable with his own set of services and he runs along the main line when you're with the other engines on the route. However, this can feel a bit disconnected, and due to the lack of the engines in the game, the island can feel a bit bare. My fear would be, if Edward was to get added along for the Brendan branch, is that I'd be stuck on his branch line all the time, separated from the other engines outside of stories. This would mean that once again we have another branch line with only 1, maybe 2 characters, and the main line still feels a bit empty. Train Sim World has a solution to this issue as well, but it's less than perfect. Often they will make a new timetable, only visible with the DLC required, and will integrate the new engines into a seamless timetable with the old ones. This isn't a bad idea at first glance, but if you keep adding DLC, then it becomes a problem, because each one will need a new DLC timetable to be added. Otherwise, they're destined to be locked off in a far-off part of the route where you can't interact with them. I think a good fix for this would be a timetable rework. When you gain a new DLC character, goes back and adds it to the old timetable. Or perhaps a DLC character like Rosie or Philip to act as shunters at the stations, whose timetable would get updated with new DLC to handle the interactions at the stations. But I doubt that would be implemented due to Percy taking the shunting role in the base game. and I doubt they'd want to change that. But let's for a moment be a little bit unrealistic. What would I like to see announced for the game which I'm not expecting at the Direct? I'd love to see a Kroven's Gate rework. I'm sorry, but the way the game has done it is actually painful on the eyes. Somehow it's worse than the CGI version, and if you're planning on adding the Skarloey engines at one point, as I hope they do, it just needs to be fixed, because as it currently stands, it's the only part of the game I actively dislike. Outside of that, as I just said, I'd love to see the Skarloey engines added. We have a few narrow gauge routes in Train Sim World, but nothing steam powered, and nothing where you can compare the gauges of the engines. It'd be very fun to hop off Gordon's Express and climb aboard Peter Sam and take him for a joyride down the line. Speaking of new tracks, I'd love to see the Little Western. I am certain this will be in the game at some point, given it gets a mention in James and the Van, but I'm just not sure if it'd be the first one added, but I'd never say no to some coastal runs down the branch line. Moving away from more branch lines and areas I'd like to see, because everyone has spoken about that to death, let's look towards engine DLC packs I'd like to see. Mainly, I'd like to see the main cast. I know not everyone like Nia and Rebecca, but they, Henry and Toby, deserve to be in the game before anyone else in my view. After that, some of the bigger secondary characters like Mavis up at the quarry, or Philip at Wellsworth should be added to fill out those locations. Mostly because then we'll have faces we can see along the way. The game at times, as I mentioned, feels a bit empty. With Diesel stuck at the harbour, Thomas and Percy off on the branch line, often at opposite ends of it, and Gordon and Emily, with James if you're in that DLC, running the main line alone. It can feel like a long time without seeing anyone, so the more characters added along the map, be it engines at the stations or places of interest, or perhaps just stuff like seeing Bertie race along the branch line or Howard in the sky, would be really nice to make the world feel a bit more lively. Same goes with rolling stock. Stuff like adding Emily's coaches or more truck variation, spawning them in the yard in free roam, that would really help in making it feel like you're not the only driver doing work. Overall, I think we will be happy with the Direct. I think people will find DLC too expensive because Dovetail always overcharges, but I think the future of the game is in really good hands at the moment. What would you like to see from the Direct? What do you think is realistic we'll see? What do you want to see that you know has no chance in hell of being added? Let me know down below in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please give me a like and subscribe. Until next time, goodbye.